It is a rather long story that we heard this morning, and this is chapter 24 in the book of Genesis, and we have been traveling along the path of Abraham and Sarah for many weeks now, and we heard from when God first called them to go, and they went to that place where they didn't know where they were going, but they were following God's will and direction, and they went, and we were told that they would be blessed with many children, and it was taking a long time. And so they took matters into their own hands, and the servant of Sarah bore Ishmael. But then God did what God had promised to do, and Isaac was born. We were kind of brokenhearted to hear that our faith ancestors had sent Hagar and Ishmael away out of Sarah's jealousy. But then we came to last week, and we see that Abraham takes his son to the top of a mountain and prepares to sacrifice him, and we were shocked and appalled and wondered about this couple that God had chosen. And we see that as they come down the mountain, God provided, gave the ram, so Isaac was safe. God has had a plan for Isaac, but when he descended the mountain, he did not go home with Dad and the servants. He went to establish his own farm and his own place of living. We found out that he didn't see his dad again until after his father was gone, and we find out in parts that were not read aloud this morning that Sarah actually moved towards the end of her life and lived closer to Isaac than she did to Abraham. And so this wonderful story comes at the end of Abraham and Sarah's story. You know, stories go, they have a beginning, a middle, and an end. And this is the end, pretty much, of Abraham and Sarah's story. Sarah has died. Abraham is doing this last thing for his son, and this last thing is to go and to spend as much money as he could on the best possible dating service and get the best possible wife and have the best possible gifts available so that his son would not be alone when he was gone. Because at 140, he figured any day now it was going to happen, and he was right. And so Abraham sends his servant to do this work for him. And you know, we are so grateful at the end of a good week or a bad week to have a story that has a perfect happy ending. We just love stories with perfect happy endings. And you know, it truly is a sense of the divine that sometimes we feel like we wish was happening in our own lives. We wish we'd always have those happy endings in our own lives, but you know, we can wish, but it's not always the way our lives go, but here it is in this story. And when we look into it, we see that when he sends his servant out, servant takes this job very seriously, knowing that he will be held accountable if he comes back with not the right wife for Isaac. And when he finally gets there, to this land outside of the land where Abraham was living, back to the land of Abraham's ancestors, he gets by a stream and he prays to his master's God, because it was not his God. But he prays to his master's God. God, you know, if this woman comes and she does this and offers me water and then offers to water the camels, I'll know that it's the one that's the right one for Isaac. And it happens. Rebecca comes out, young, healthy, strong, big water jar on her shoulder, sees a guy, he asks for a little water. She says, sure. And she offers to water his camels. Now, you know, a water jar is only so big, and let's say she was taller than me even. It could only hold so much water in it. So she had to make a bunch of trips to water those camels. But Rebecca is the one God chose for really good reasons, not just because she was from the land of Abraham's ancestors, but because she is a strong and courageous woman. She is able to do the very thing that Abraham and Sarah did. Because remember what I just said a little bit ago? That Abraham, when God spoke to him and said, go to the land that I will show you, and Sarah didn't know where they were going, the same thing is happening to Rebekah. Because Rebekah doesn't know where this guy that she's going to be introduced and marry lives. But she, with that same sense of adventure and courage, goes to this place. She's also from a line of wonderful matriarchs, and so she had that kind of understanding of what it means to lead as part of a husband-wife team. We hear that little bit of oddness in the story that when she finally, and the servant and Rebekah finally arrive to the place where Isaac is, that he brings her into his mother's tent. You know, and I have to say, oh, that's kind of odd. And you may have thought, well, that's kind of odd and strange. Must have been a mama's boy. But in reality, what being told is that Rebekah is now the matriarch of our faith ancestors. Because there's Abraham and Sarah, the first patriarch and matriarch, and now there's Isaac and Rebekah, and she's the one that's going to bring forth the progeny, the kids, that are continue to build this kingdom that God has desired for God's people. And we think, well, this is all just a lovely story about how a kind of mature man, he was about 40 years old, and apparently a confirmed bachelor when he gets married. But the story of this man, looks for a wife. It's a story that many young adults have, and where am I going to find my wife? How am I going to find a wife? But in this story, it's not just about the surface story about a dad finding a wife for a son because he knows that son will be fulfilling God's promises. It's about how God continues to provide for God's people, and it's about how God continues to bless God's people. But it's also about that moment in which Isaac is able to claim faith in God for himself. We will continue to see that each story, each generation has to claim faith for themselves, just as our young people have to claim their faith in God for themselves. So it was for Isaac. When he came down that mountain trying to figure out who his daddy was, who was about to sacrifice him and couldn't go back with his daddy and couldn't live with him and be in relationship with him, something happened between then and when Rebekah shows up. And he starts to understand that it wasn't just his daddy's God, but it was his God, and that his God was caring for him, and his God was protecting him, and now his God is providing a wife, and the blessing will continue. Rebekah and Isaac go on to have this wonderful family, and we're going to hear more about them, and we're going to continue to be watching as our faith ancestors, people from whom we will learn about our relationship with God, lived in relationship with God. Because one of the things that we've all come to understand is we could know a lot about God. We could study the Bible, we can study the commentaries, we can go to Bible study classes, we can listen to the radio Bible passages, but it's not until we know God, until we have a personal relationship with God, then that thing that's supposed to be transformative in our lives is actually starting to happen. And we need that not only for ourselves, we need to be able to pass that down, because part of the legacy that Abraham passed on to Isaac was this legacy of faith and understanding. Isaac may have been mad at his daddy, but he came to understand the God who provided was the God who continues to provide. And that's the same kind of thing each and every faith community must do. Each and every faith community must pass on a legacy of faith to those who will come behind us, so that they will come to understand the God that we know, and the relationship that God wants to have with them is the kind of relationship God has wanted with us, and that is to love us wholly, fully, and for us to love God And then, out of that great love that God has for us and we have for God, it'll just flow over, and we will love one another as God loves us. That's the legacy we have to share. That is what we need to be sharing with our next generations about the God that we know. Not just the God we've read about, but the God that we've experienced in those tough days. Because this story isn't a story about people who were always well behaved. They didn't always do the right thing. They didn't always wait upon the Lord. They didn't always stop being control freaks and let God do what God wanted to do. Sometimes Abraham just couldn't wait. But God forgave Abraham and kept setting him back on this right path that God wanted him to journey upon, so that God's dreams for God's people would be fulfilled. And God is making that promise to us. When we make mistakes, when we get it wrong, when life seems really hard, when our bodies fail us, our minds kind of get forgetful and we get achy all over, mind, body, and spirit, God is there with us. And God will continue to provide for us and continue to bless our lives, because we believe in a God who truly is our refuge and our strength. From Psalm 46. God is our refuge and strength, a help always near in times of great trouble. That's why we won't be afraid. When the world falls apart, when the mountains crumble into the center of the sea, when the waters roar and rage, when the mountains shake because of the surging waves, there is a river whose streams gladden God's city, the holiest dwelling of the Most High. God is in that city. It will never crumble. God is in Topeka. Remember that, folks. God is in Topeka, and it will never crumble. God will help it when morning dawns. Nations roar, kingdoms crumble. God utters his voice, the earth melts. The Lord of heavenly forces is with us. The God of Jacob is our place of safety. Come, see the Lord's deeds. What devastation he has imposed on the earth, bringing wars to an end in every corner of the world, breaking the bow and shattering the spear, burning chariots with fire. That's enough. Know that I am God. I am exalted among the nations. I am exalted throughout the world. The Lord of heavenly forces is with us. The God of Jacob is our place of safety. Who do you know that needs to hear that? You know, people had to put themselves out to meet new family members. They didn't just go across the street. They just didn't go to the next neighborhood. They had to go to that place that they had never seen before, to talk to people they had never known before, not knowing how those people were going to handle it. Were they going to be accepted? Were they going to be killed? They didn't know. But what God kept doing was pushing the boundaries of where God had influence so that all the world would come to know God. Jesus Christ came to push the boundaries so that God would make God's self known to us in a way that could not be denied, because we looked into the face of God and experienced God's love and compassion. Who do you know that needs to meet our faith family? Who needs to hear our story? Who needs to come to Vacation Bible Camp? Who needs to go to Farmers Market? First Wednesday worship? Who needs to come to know the love of Jesus Christ so that they may know that they are not alone and that our God is the God of our refuge and our strength? It's your challenge this week. Be faithful.